Hello and welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from District 32 in Salem, and I welcome you again to join us in a program where we hope to develop a little more insight into how our state government operates and the individuals who operate within state government. Our guest today is Representative Peter Courtney from House District 33 in Salem-Keizer. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Kevin.
Our show is a little different in the sense that we just try to have a conversational format and develop some background information and then pick up from there and talk a little bit about issues. I bet you there's a lot of people out there who don't know where Peter Courtney came from, where he went to school. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I came to Oregon in 1969 right out of Boston University Law School, and before that I'd gotten a master's degree and a bachelor's degree at the University of Rhode Island, public policy, public information. So I guess you'd say I came out here from Rhode Island, but I'd spent some time in the hills of West Virginia, grade school and high school, and even a year of college in Concord College in Athens, West Virginia.
Is that where you picked up your lilt?
Yeah, I think that they call it a hillbilly actually accent as opposed to a southern accent, then you get the northern accent. But West Virginia was a major player in my life, and one day I've got to go back to Charleston, West Virginia, just to touch base with my roots.
When did you come to Oregon?
It was July 9th, I'll never forget it, 1969. I remember it very, very well. And I was all by my lonesome and took a bus from Portland down to Salem and checked in at a room in the YMCA and stayed there for 2 years.
Now, did you go to school here at all, or did you go to work for the state, or what did you do?
Came out here because I'd had a law clerkship lined up with the brand newly created Court of Appeals. Judge William Fort had hired me from Boston University, so I didn't know anybody except I knew his name. I talked to him once on the phone. We exchanged one letter, I think, and he had to come up with a law clerk real quick like, because the 69 legislative session had just created the Court of Appeals, and so here I was, and that's how it all happened.
Did you clerk for 2 years then?
1 year, clerkships for 1 year, and then I went to work for a thing called Oregon Tax Research, which is a very conservative watchdog group of the Oregon legislature, and then from there I went on and worked for the Personnel Division, State of Oregon, and did some private practice, legal aid attorney, and of course the assistant to the president at Western Oregon State College, where I've been since July of 1980.
Well, I'm curious about your time in the legal practice. Did you become a member of the Oregon Bar pretty early on when you came to Oregon?
No, I had to struggle with the bar, Kevin. It took me 3 times to pass it. In fact, back in those days, if I hadn't passed it the 3rd time, I wouldn't have been a member of the bar. It was all over. Passed it in the summer of 1973. I didn't try to take it right away, but it still took me 3 times to pass it, right?
And then you were into private practice for a while?
No, I was working in the Personnel Division, State of Oregon, Executive Department. I was sort of their legal guru, their administrative rules, advisor, and that kind of thing. And then I worked there till actually 1975, and then I became the hearings officer for the Employment Relations Board. I was the only one in the state to handle all these classified employees' grievances and appeals and things. Did that for about 5 years, and then I got involved in both legal aid and also private practice.
Well, you've bounced around a lot, but it seems that most of the connections have been at some point with politics and government and the whole interaction between citizens and government. Is that fair to say? That's
pretty true. I had never thought of it quite like that, but I've always been around government. I guess to be frank with you, when I got my master's degree in public administration from the University of Rhode Island, I really seriously considered a career as a city manager. I was really drawn to that. I still am fascinated by that type of person, that kind of administrative skills and those abilities. And I suppose that was more of a factor in how I'd end up then later on getting a law degree.
Now, early on, or I should say earlier than your current 2 terms, and now you've just been reelected to a 3rd term, but earlier you were in the legislature. How did that come about, your first 2 terms?
Well, I was on the Salem City Council. I was elected that in 1974, and I was finishing up after about 6 years, and I remember very much watching the legislature from the gallery area when I first got here. And I knew one day I'd probably run for the legislature. Nobody in my family had ever been involved in that kind of thing before, and I sort of thought, you know, it's always nice to be the first of something in your life, and that was probably my only chance. So I decided to take a shot at it, and it wasn't, the shot I took, 1979, 1980, wasn't the easiest thing in the world, because I had to get through a very tough primary, and then I had to take out a Republican incumbent, but that's how it all happened.
Now, who did you knock out in that first race?
I knocked out Representative Chick Edwards, and that night was the night Ronald Reagan, 1980, was sweeping the state of Oregon, and I think we were the only ones to take out a Republican incumbent that night, and it was an incredible race because I had to get through a three-way primary to even get there. So I was pretty tired. Our campaign organization was pretty tired that night.
Isn't that where you developed your reputation for nobody works harder, you just were slugging away during that primary and campaign?
Yes, the phrase, the slogan, which I've used since then, Kevin, nobody works harder, we coined that phrase for that campaign. And I had no idea the impact of that slogan and that logo, or slogan is a better word. And it also meant that I couldn't just drop it after the campaign. People would hold me to it. So ever since then, I've been reminded by all kinds of people, both when I was campaigning and when in the legislature, oh yeah, nobody works harder, right, Courtney? So I boxed myself in pretty well, but that was the campaign, right, where we introduced the slogan, nobody works harder.
Well, I've picked up on a slogan that Mannix delivers, so I have the same problem now.
Believe me, they'll hold you to that.
Well, let me go back then to those 2 terms that you served in the legislature. Were you aspiring to any kind of position with the Democratic caucus at the time, or was this something where you mainly focused on committee work and that sort of thing?
I was only focused on being a great legislator. I never saw myself as any kind of caucus leader or any kind of House or Senate leader. Those are things that just went to other people. At that time, I saw them as pretty partisan positions. And while I say I'm not partisan, but I'm very much of a competitor, I just felt that the kinds of things you do to become those kinds of leaders probably wouldn't fit my style. So I really never thought seriously in 81 and 83 and in the 450 special sessions in between, there were many special sessions back then, Kim, that I would ever stand up and ask to be the leader of the caucus.
Now, after those 2 terms, in that process, you ran for Congress at one point. That didn't work out.
Yeah, that was my move. I had this goal, you know, you're supposed to have goals in life. And I had this goal that I would be in the Salem City Council or local government and state government and then the United States Congress, because we profiled the Congress in '84, and you have all the members there, 535, whatever number it is, Senate and House together. Only a tiny fraction had ever had that federal experience, what we call federal. And I really felt that would be a great experience to be in the United States Congress. And so I thought maybe, got killed in the Democratic primary, came in second out of a group of 4 and left myself $20,000 in debt. Really got wiped out and really got taught a lesson. So yeah, that was 1984.
But to use a phrase Jeff Gilmore used with me recently, you were perhaps defeated but not beaten. That is, you were back in the ring as far as hanging in there politically.
Well, it's funny, Kevin. That night I lost it. I'll never forget it. I won't say it's a near-death experience because there's nothing worse than death in terms of loved ones you lose, but I don't know if I've ever really recovered from that defeat and the other defeat that would come right after that. I think once you've been in politics and you've been successful in it, and then you lose, that's terribly, terribly painful. And so I'm still wondering whether or not it didn't take something out of me in one way that has never come back. I really, because I find myself wondering about it, because if you're trying to get into politics and you lose, that's one thing. But if you've been winning, Kevin, and then you lose, something in there really, I think, very, very painful.
But isn't it also a good reality check for a politician, and then it brings you back to focus on your own vulnerability with the voters?
I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but I'll tell you, it made me a probably better politician and elected official than I would have been otherwise. I was really hot back then. I was on this kind of trajectory, and man, I was just gangbusters. But many things were done, I think, in terms of anticipating if I could move into move to Congress. Now I don't have that. Now, in terms of really looking at issues and really looking at the players and looking at what good public policy is about, I think probably I am, maybe just because I'm older, but I think the defeats in my life in politics have had something to do with probably doing what you just said. It affects you in a way in which you come down to earth and makes you realize that you better start concentrating on the matters at hand.
Well, the reason why I was thinking about that was when, in 1982, I ran for Circuit Court Judge in Marion County.
That's
twice in the same year.
That's right, I remember that.
Running sort of against the establishment and lost both those races.
But you did very well, you did very well, I remember that, right.
But it was a humbling experience, too, and helped redefine my understanding of my role in life, that you're not always God's gift to everybody.
No, and but the trouble is we got all these golden boys and golden girls around who've never lost. And you wonder how they're able to do it, and people like myself haven't. So, that's for another TV program, probably.
Well, now you did have, and the other race you're referring to is you made a race for the state senate.
Yeah, Crazy Peter. I came back 2 years later and ran against Cobb Houck, who was the incumbent state senator for my legislative district, and got beat again. And that just about did it. That just about did me in. That was just about the end of it.
You stayed away from politics for a little while after that?
I think about a month. And the only reason I got back in, though, is I'll never forget Mike Kopetsky. I remember the restaurant on Broadway where he wanted to meet me. I don't remember the name of it. And it was in February of the '87 session, and he told me he was going to run for Congress, and he wanted me to run to take over my old seat. And thought surely I'd be in a pretty good position because of name familiarity and everything. So I thought about it and made the mistake, which I usually make, which I don't make much anymore, but then I made, wait too long before I let it know I was going to do it. Got myself in another brutal primary and finally won the seat, but just barely on a recount 3 weeks after the election by 98 votes.
However, you and I both got to get in at that time.
That's true.
That was back in '88, and
88, 89.
you have 2 sessions up on me, 2 terms because of your earlier service. We've now just both been reelected to our 3rd terms in a succession. Your 5th term in total in the House of Representatives. So now I'm kind of shifting and kind of wondering about the last 4 years and the next 2 years to come. But I'd like to pause for a moment and go back to this transition point back in '88. How did it feel coming back into the House of Representatives at that time?
Well, I had 2 feelings. One is I couldn't feel anything. What happened to Mary Grimes is I went to bed at night losing, and I remember Vera Katz called me about 3 o'clock in the morning, said, "You're up 20." I couldn't believe it. Finally, Thursday, we found out I'd won by 108, and then they waited to the last minute for a recount 3 weeks later, and I would win by 98. So I was still, that was a very difficult time. I was very frightened and scared. I didn't understand what had happened. I still don't understand what happened in that election, except there is a phenomenon at work there, which might talk about. And so I was really concentrating on more of that than anything else. What's wrong with me? Why can't I seem to get this thing right? Than I was the actual session and what I would do and what I wouldn't do.
Well, you mentioned that there was a phenomena there. What were you talking about?
Kevin, I think if you get out of politics, I really believe this, if one steps out of politics and then tries to come back, I think you're tilting at you're playing with the gods. If Jim Hill called me a few days after, I'll never forget it, State Senator Jim Hill, now state-elect treasurer, and said, "I want to congratulate you because you made it." I said, "Yeah, but I just barely made it." He says, "Courtney, you don't understand what happened. The fact that you just got in is a miracle because people don't do that." And I really believe there's something in that. When you get out of politics and you try to come back, there's a phenomenon with the voter, like, they'll never maybe admit it in a poll, to a pollster or anything, but it's like you had your time. And that is really a factor that you have to overcome, and I don't think it's very easy to do it.
Well, I guess our goal now has to be not to be in that position.
Well, no, and Kevin, you may disagree with me, but I really believe that I'm really a student of people who've left politics and then try to come back, and it's very risky stuff.
Well, we just saw that phenomenon then with Ruth McFarland, who just was defeated.
That's exactly what I thought of that night when those votes were rolling in. And she's the person who beat me, by the way, in the '84 primary for Congress. But that's a very good example. You'd think there wouldn't be a problem, especially if you were a good legislator at the time you left, for whatever reason, because you have good name familiarity and everything. There is something there that if you're going to try to make that move, you better look out, because it's not where you were on the issues. It's none of that kind of stuff. It's you left, maybe you should stay left. And I think that that's the thing that I learned from the '88 election.
A challenging political comeback trail.
Mm.
Let me pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from District 32 in the Salem area. I'm your host. Our guest today is a newly re-elected Democrat in the Oregon House of Representatives, Representative Peter Courtney, who represents District 33, which is in the Salem-Keizer area, largely centered in Keizer. Representative Courtney has also just been re-elected as the leader of the House Democratic Caucus, something which we'll be addressing in a few minutes. In any event, we're glad to have you with us on Capital Insight. I'm picking up a bit on the last 2 terms then, because you and I were in there, and again, you were the veteran coming back. We had a lot of new members, and I saw you pushing real hard at a number of legislative fronts, focusing more on the substantive legislation rather than the procedural side, the caucus side, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. How did you feel during that first session in terms of, this is the '89 session, in terms of the challenges and the issues that we were dealing with at the time?
It was a very good session because I was on the House Judiciary Committee, as you were, and it was the high water mark for crime and corrections, even greater than it had ever been in the early '80s, in '81, '83, when I was in the Judiciary Committee, when we put together all the drunk driving legislation, which at that time was the best in the nation. But we were building a prison a day, it seemed like, sentencing guidelines. It was really, I felt, a very dynamic time to be in the House Judiciary Committee, which is my favorite of all committees. I think it's the workhorse committee of the Oregon Legislature. And every day, things that were happening on that committee, which I felt very good about. I was, as you know, chair of the little subcommittee, Family Justice. We put together the power of attorney over health care decisions, where we had to bring together different groups. I really felt very good. I liked being back. I liked the caucus. And outside of being scared to death, because I figured when you win by 98 votes, you better do everything right, because they're going to come for you next time you're up, which was the only distracting thing. It was very good to be back, and I was reborn. I was almost like born again.
Well, then we shift, and you have to go through the next re-election process, which was in 1990.
Right.
How did that go for you?
No disrespect meant to my opponents. They didn't really target me, and so I didn't have a real rough go of it. We had two opponents, but you know, we raised the money and things like that. But it was actually the first time since almost I began politics, Kevin, in 1974. My wife reminded me we didn't have a brutal campaign, and those campaigns were starting to take its toll, by the way, on me and my family. But at that time, there was a little bit of a let-up. I still had to get out there and go door to door. Still had to put some lawn signs up. But I felt that just maybe I'd gotten over the hump of this person who left politics trying to come back. And so it was an okay campaign.
Well, then we just finished another campaign. How'd that compare to 1990, this 92 campaign?
For me personally?
Sure.
Well, I was a little worried. Both you and I are incumbents. Both of us know the voters are very dissatisfied and angry. And even though there wasn't a lot of money spent against me, and it didn't appear to be a targeted race, I had two opponents again. I'm the guy who draws two opponents. And occasionally I really would wonder, you know, once you said, Kevin, once you've lost as I've lost, you never get over it. It's like a track meet. No matter what your lead is, they tell you not to look back, but you're going to look back. And the coach is screaming at you. And so I found myself wondering, horrors, could it happen to me again numerous times to this last election?
Back in 1990, you made a decision and I made a decision not to run for a Senate vacancy. And it's always assumed that House members who have, there are 60 House members, and our districts are half the size of the Senate members' districts. We have to run every 2 years. Senators get to run every 4 years, and again, they have twice as large a district. So it's considered in some respects to be desirable to be in the Senate. You and I both made decisions not to run for an open Senate seat.
Right.
In fact, we share the same Senate district. My own reasons were basically that I was happy in the House, I was just getting going in the House, and I thought that was where my mission was. What were your reasons for not running in 1990 for the Senate?
Because I had a reputation in some people's mind of moving too quick. I remember going door to door in the 1988 campaign where someone says, I'm not going to support you because you're always looking to climb, you're always looking to move. Here I'd been in the city council. 6 years later in the state legislature, that was accepted. But then 2 terms there, which is really not a lot, in the United States Congress, then you come back, you want to go state Senate, and I felt that way. And I remember an editorial in the Kaiser Times, which reminded Les Seitz about the time, where he said, we hope that if Peter is elected, that he'll decide to stay in the seat for a while and let's move real quickly. So I really felt that that would have been interpreted as, here's Courtney again, just looking to climb any way he can, not paying his dues. And so that probably, along with the fact that my wife flat out, Kevin, that's the first time since I've been married to Margie, who's been involved with me in politics since the beginning, who said to me, I'm really not in for a real tough campaign, Peter. This family, we have 3 young children, we need some rest. And so I think those are the 2 reasons that I decided to let it go.
So now you and I are embarking on our 3rd terms in succession, your 5th term total in the House. I'd like to shift from that to what you just mentioned, Margie and you have 3 sons. When did you get married?
I got married. Yeah, I always get myself in trouble on this one because I know it was definitely January, and it was January 3rd, 1975. I got married, and I was 33 almost. I was 32 and a half, and Margie, my wife, was 29 and a half. We'd love to talk about that, so that's when I got married. We were actually, people are surprised at how old I was when I first got married and how old Margie was when she first got married.
Where did you 2 meet?
Well, all right. I was, there's an apartment house in Kaiser, and I was going over there on a Saturday morning to see some of the law clerks that I was clerking with, and she came out of an apartment on the 1st floor, and I saw her walk in front of me, and I said, I don't know who that is, but I'm sure going to find out. So I found out and I called her up. That's how I met her. She wasn't real enamored with that, Kevin, I'll be very frank. It took me 3 months to talk her into going out with me.
So you had other challenges before your political
Oh, yeah,
challenges.
yeah, that's for sure.
And you have 3 sons now?
Mm-hmm. Peter, Sean, and Adam.
And as far as the experience goes, I notice that Margie seems to be moderately involved in your politics. I mean, sometimes spouses are heavily involved. She's obviously knowledgeable and tuned in, but not there constantly as your assistant and that sort of thing. How do you balance that out, your home life and your political life?
First of all, I never would have been elected to the Salem City Council in 1974 if it weren't for Margie. We were dating then. She was the one that got me to go door to door. I'm basically very, very shy, and I couldn't bring myself to knock on that first door. And she got out there and was knocking on the doors and would drag me along and got me to forget about my shyness. And she was more popular at the door than I was. And in 1979, and he returned again, I froze on the doorsteps. And she got out there and would walk with me every day, and actually across the street, and she won more votes than I ever have. So I would never have been elected to the Salem City Council because I had to take out an incumbent, and I never would have been elected to the Oregon legislature if it weren't for Margie. Since then, of course, we've had children, and the only thing I'll tell you is, Kevin, if I were not living in Salem, Kaiser, I wouldn't be in the Oregon legislature. I'll just be very frank with you. I would not move my family from Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon to Salem for the legislative session. I think I'm very lucky to have my house probably as close to the capital as any other legislative district, and it allows me to be working at Western Oregon State College and at the same time, you know, be around the kids. I've given up a lot of things. I'm not asking you to cry about that, but there's a lot of opportunities I've had in life that because I'm an older man with younger children, it's the way it happened in life. Our children came late. I cannot do some of the things that perhaps I would do if that weren't the case. And also Margie stays home, and she wants to do that, so that's how we're able to put it together, and I guess I'm just lucky that my district is close to the capital.
But you also dote on your kids. I mean, I see you at soccer games, school functions, and just about everywhere.
Well, you're going to embarrass me, because I like to see I'm a tough sort of former Marine football player, and you're not supposed to dote, you're supposed to be tough. People have said that about me. If I'm there and you see me, you're there too, so you dote on yours as well. So, you know, I don't know. I think, Kevin, when you're as old as I am and you have young children, the kind of father you are is different than if I'd have had my children in the early 20s. I'll be very frank with you. And I think that because my children came so late in life, I was 39 when I had my first son, first child, Kevin. I think that's had a tremendous impact on how I see being a father, and that's all I can tell you.
But I mean, I meant it as a compliment. It's sort of a mellow image.
Yeah, but I'm supposed to be rugged, you know. I'm supposed to be macho.
We'll have to change that.
Right.
While we're talking
I think.
While we're talking about changing things, I'll just mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, your host. Sometimes you may not be able to tell that from this interchange. Our guest today is Representative Peter Courtney. He's a fellow Democrat from Salem, and I should mention for the record that I usually interview about half Republicans and half Democrats, so this is a nonpartisan show. Picking up on that, I do want to shift into the partisan side, though, because you just were elected as the head of the Democratic caucus. I should say re-elected, and there was a tough transition for the Democrats, getting knocked out of the majority of the House, and for our audience, I'll mention that's very important. If you've got the majority in the House, you get to control all the committee chairmanships and really control the agenda for the House of Representatives. The Republicans took control with the majority last session, and they've maintained it. In the midst of this, though, you were elected as head of the Democratic caucus. Tell us about that transition.
You mean how I was elected or what we did?
Well, the time that you came in and the challenges that faced you, and you've reported on this.
Yeah, 2 years ago when I stood up before the caucus and they decided to have me be the caucus leader, I just couldn't believe what I found and what you found as well. And if I had known it would be that bad, I never would have done it. Our books were the worst books in the state almost, as you know. Our finances, we were in debt, $40,000. The caucus staff was in disarray. Our image and reputation as a caucus was the worst among the media and the lobby. I mean, you know this because you were with me and had to endure it. We were embarrassed and we were humiliated. We had lost, plus we'd had all kinds of investigation and criminal charges with some of the members. It was just really bad. And we, in 2 years as a caucus, have put ourselves in the black for the first time since I can remember as being a member of the caucus. That goes back to even before the 80s. Our books, our C&E books, if you go down to the Secretary of State's office, Kevin, I am told, are A+. In fact, they're the best books in the state. We've got a caucus staff now who Republicans have told me they'd rather come into our office than their office, and I'll leave the Republicans' names not mentioned because I think it's the best caucus staff in the entire building now. I think our reputation and our image in respectability and credibility has been turned around. It's right up there with all of the rest of them, maybe even better. The only one thing is that I failed to do is we didn't get 31 votes on election night, so it's sort of it's incomplete, and I feel real bad about that.
But you started out with, we had 28 Democrats in the House, but
Right.
only 22 running for re-election,
Right,
and that's an
no.
important factor.
Right.
And so you had a larger uphill climb than the Republicans did this time.
Yeah, they had like 28. I think it dropped to 27 when Sinceri got out. But, you know, I was talking to Steve Dean, the Oregonian's editorial, or one of his economists on Saturday. He called me. I called him, I guess. And he said that Craig Berkman, the head of the Republican Party, had told him just a week out he thought for sure they had 35 seats, maybe 36. The Republican majority leader was saying they thought they could easily get 34 seats. So they really thought, and I think I can understand why they thought it starting out, that they could wound us so badly in terms of numbers that they wouldn't have to worry about us for the rest of the century. In that sense, we really have surprised them, and we fought a good fight. We didn't gain anything, but we held them off, and they weren't able to wipe us out. But it would have been, I just wish that we could have gotten to 31, but, you know, what can I say?
Well, now we have the challenge of the next 2 years, and how do you see this upcoming session in the next 2 years shaping up in terms of the issues? We've got about 3 minutes left, I should mention that. So in terms of the issues that we're going to be confronting.
Oh, I tell you, this reminds me of the 81 and 83 sessions where we didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars we needed, and that makes, you're really going to see who's the leaders, and, you know, there's this old saying, the cream rises to the top. We got all kinds of new legislators coming in, Kevin, and this is the time from some of the veterans have really got a star. This budget thing is going to be a nightmare. We've got to find at least $500 to $700 million now, at least the next 2 years, if not correct the whole system. If we're a great legislative session, one of the greatest in the history of the state, the 93 session, we will be recorded as such if we can solve the ballot measure 5 thing. And as you know, Kevin, we still got some serious crime and corrections problems. We thought the 89 session, we'd pretty much solved it, but I know how hard you've worked in this area. Our criminal justice system still isn't right. I mean, it's just not right yet. And if we could have another great crime and corrections system session. And one other thing, Kevin, I'm really concerned about this, and I know you are too. We got an environmental crisis in this state that's tremendous. We are trashing the air and the land and the water, and we just don't seem to pay much attention to that anymore. And, you know, I know that that's one of the things you probably cherish about the state, and I know I do. We need a great session in those 3 areas. I mean, a great session. And we're going to find out who stars and who falls by the wayside.
Over the next 2 years, are you going to be considering whether or not you want to stay in the House? I really shouldn't ask you this kind of question, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
It's a very legitimate question. Kevin, because of what I've been through in politics and because I'm now 49 and my children are very young, most of my political options are gone in life. I mean, I can't imagine going to Washington, D.C. One time I thought about it.
But don't you find it fulfilling to be in the House and try to address Oregon's issues?
Oh, yeah. I'm not burned out yet. I'm not tired. I'm the kind of person when I am, like I was in the Salem City Council when I decided to leave, then I leave. I don't plan to stay in the House. Of course, after term limits, where you and I aren't going to stay much longer. But even if there hadn't been a term limit, I don't stay forever, and I'm not burned out yet. In fact, you know something, Kevin? And I think this is in you, too. I like it when it's real tough. I mean, I like it when it's this tough, to tell you the truth.
Well, on that note, we are going to have a tough couple of years, and maybe you'll have a couple of years more after that. You've got 2 more opportunities at re-election, 3 actually with term limits, so keep that in mind. I'll mention to our audience, you've been with us on Capitol Insight. Our guest has been Representative Peter Courtney from District 32 in Kaiser-Salem. He is the Democratic caucus leader for the House of Representatives, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
And thanks to our audience. paid for and authorized by Citizens for Mannix, 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon 97301.